Cora Rennie, and I can't wait for you to hear from Joanne Kim as part of our Understanding People Pleasing Summit for women to uncover the root causes, embrace self-compassion, and create deep connections you've been craving. Today, Joanne and I are going to talk about feelings that highly sensitive persons overdo and underdo and how it makes hard things worse. Joanne Kim is a therapist turned feelings translator who helps highly sensitive persons turn their biggest feelings into their greatest superpower. The people who work with her are often the first or only person in their family or communities to intuitively process and express feelings. Consequently, they're often judged or criticized, so they learn to people please, placate, or perform until they hit a wall. They're super familiar with anxiety, guilt, and shame, partly because of an allergic reaction to anger, their own and others. Often the super responsible, empathetic, and ethical person in their environments, they reach out to Joanne after they've already burnt out, they're resentful in their lopsided relationships, or they're sucked into this shame spiral. When Joanne shares about her approach to working with feelings, the number one response she gets is, "Why didn't they teach me this in school?" And that's exactly why she created the Big Feelings Foundations. Okay, there's just so much richness in all of that, Joanne. I really can't wait to explore it. You also had the phrase in there, why it's so important not to play favorites with feelings. So I feel like there's lots for us to talk about. But before we dive in, can you just share a little bit about your story and how you came to be doing the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so I grew up as the firstborn daughter of a Korean immigrant family. So not a whole lot of feelings or room for emotions growing up. Also grew up in the church as a queer person. So lots of repressing feelings and learning how to mask just to survive and to get by, to be censoring the things that I say, to manage even my facial expressions so that I don't get into trouble or draw negative attention and things like that. So it wasn't until right after college where I was doing the responsible thing. I was working as a pastor at some point, and I remember this one event where I was the person in charge with like the earpiece in and the clipboard, and it was just running around the event trying to, herd a bunch of cats basically and running this event until I just kind of lost my shit and had a lot of anger that seemed to come out of nowhere. And yeah, that was the moment that got me to reach out to my own therapy. And so did a lot of work in finding out like where these feelings even came from, because I kind of thought that I was like a very like level-headed, reasonable, functional person, only to find out that it wasn't like I was unemotional. It was more that I was in a state of numbness for the majority of my life. And
Mhm.
so a lot of this is from my own personal experiences. And several years in, I became a therapist myself, working with a lot of people who had lots of very similar narratives. Of course, our life circumstances are different, but I kept hearing the same refrain over and over again. Like, I'm trying really hard to keep my feelings in check, but I don't know why they keep just spilling over. One of the main criticisms I get is that I have too many feelings or I'm too sensitive, and I just want my relationships to go well, but I have no idea how to do it. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
at this point, I'm working as a therapist, but I also am operating as a feelings translator, helping people navigate this whole world because it turns out it's not as complicated as we think it is.
Good.
And
That's good news.
yeah.
Okay. So I do want to back up because the whole intro was about being a highly sensitive person.
Mhm.
And so I kind of like to identify myself, and I do feel that there is potentially a link between um personality and the people pleasing behaviors,
Yeah.
maybe. But and I know I'm a highly sensitive person. I discovered that languaging, I don't know, like a decade ago. But just in case anyone
Mhm.
in our audience doesn't know what we're talking about, can you just kind of go into that just to start with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the highly sensitive person trait, as coined by Dr. Elaine Aron, in short, basically talks about how 20% of the population in our nervous systems, in our bodies, we experience life very differently. I like thinking of it as like being a Blu-ray person in a DVD world. So we take in a lot more sensory information, a lot more emotional information. We run all of that through a very fine sieve, meaning it takes us a minute to process and digest through all these different experiences, which leads us to require more time in thinking things through first before we might come to a decision if we come to a decision at all. And so a lot of times there's a lot of overwhelm, a lot of feeling backlogged because there's just so much that, just in a given day or even in a given hour, a lot more quantity and quality of experiences that people who are non highly sensitive persons, it wouldn't occur to them because they would just kind of gloss it over. So what happens when we experience a lot of these very nuanced or very subtle things that 80% of the world, the majority in the world, doesn't even register? So a lot of highly sensitive persons tend to feel really confused about themselves, have a lot of shame and self-questioning because it's like, well, I'm looking around and everyone else seems to be fine. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. So it's a lot
Right.
of that getting tangled up on the inside.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest piece is feeling so different and not understanding why you can't be like everybody else. But
Hmm.
we actually literally, um, like you said, in our nervous systems on a
Hmm.
very deep level, we're just wired to have different
Yeah.
experiences. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And there's that aspect of being maybe the only one in your family. I've been
Hmm.
reflecting on my situation. I feel like probably my mother is a highly sensitive person, but but also there was no way to relate because she might have been the only one in her family and all of
Hmm.
her feelings were like shut down. And so
Yep.
as a little person, and she's now my mother, she shut down all my big feelings too, right? So
Hmm.
um yeah, so it's not just being the lone highly sensitive, it's about
Hmm.
being able to embrace being highly sensitive,
Yeah. And our
right?
social context says a whole lot about what kind of experience we end up having.
Mm,
You take the same person who's in this country, not particularly known to be friendly towards minorities, but valuing things that are like loud, biggest, strongest,
yeah,
whoever's the clearest winner, who can yell the strongest, or, make it to first place. A lot of the highly sensitive person traits don't quite mesh well with this kind of environment. And that's also why we tend to have a really hard time, not because there's something wrong with us, but this is the context that we're living in. But you
sure.
take the same person, you drop him off in a different part of the world, a place like Japan, which I think is probably a very HSP trait oriented environment because of like the emphasis towards things that are more natural, like nature is a big thing, being more soft spoken, waiting your turn, thinking about what is good for the collective, and being conscientious and considerate, and all those things. Where the American asshole who comes over, thinking that they should have things their way, they're seen as rude and aggressive and whatever.
Right. God, I've never considered that. Like I've always thought of it like in the context of family, but not the bigger picture of actual like
Mhm.
culture. That's awesome. That's amazing to
Yeah.
think about and to consider, and
Yeah.
that all of that shapes us
Yeah.
totally.
I mean, you could
Um,
also put like gender
sure.
role expectations or sibling birth order, or different faith contexts, and so all those layers, I think of the highly sensitive person trait as, if you go to the optometrist, they put that big headgear on you and they have those overlapping lenses. The HSP trait is one lens, but
Sure.
the end result we experience depends on how that interacts with other lenses of our identities.
Right. And then, and also theoretically, because at the core, we're starting as highly sensitive, those other factors were probably more sensitive to them than maybe a different personality type. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
mean, I think
Anyways,
that
I don't know.
sometimes some experience tend to accentuate. So
Mm,
being more internal, more reflective, thinking about things ahead of time, like if we're in a situation that calls for that, great. We have a leg up compared to other people who tend to like impulsively just jump into things.
Right.
But when it comes to, let's say, we get into a car accident, right? And we need to make some quick decisions so that like we and other people are safe. Sometimes that kind of experience can be too much where we end up shutting down, which is like the last thing. Like I got into a car accident several years ago and my brain just shut down. So fortunately in that moment I called a friend and was like, "Hey, I just got into a car accident. I'm shutting down. I don't know what else to do. Can you just tell me the next three steps?" So I borrowed her brain so that I
Sure.
can figure out the next things. But, there are those kinds of moments where we don't have a lot of opportunities to think through
Yeah.
things, more
Yeah.
things that are more time sensitive, or other people are like we're the bottleneck.
Sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so that's just highlighting that we do process things different, and it kind of sounds like we maybe struggle and or have challenges in certain areas, but there's gifts to it too.
Yeah.
But and so I don't know if we want to go into that right now, if we want to start talking about because because we want to bring it back to the emotions, and we did talk
Yeah.
about shame spirals and anger and things like that.
Hmm.
So I really want to dive into that as
Hmm.
well. Like, so I don't know what's the best way to start into that. Is it like, do we start
Yeah.
talking about the toughest feelings that highly sensitive feel, or how do you want to start going into this?
Yeah. I mean, so sensory experience wise, I like thinking about emotions like the big five feelings. So you take the Inside Out movies feelings, you
Yes.
know, mad, anger, sadness, all that. You just swap that one character. So mad, sad, glad, scared, numb.
Mm,
So the one that I swapped out is disgust for numbness.
right.
And I like thinking about these together as a group because sometimes we understand things better in comparison to other feelings.
Beautiful. Okay.
Hmm. And of those big five feelings, anger is probably the most high energy, high activity one because there's like sadness and joy, which can be more passive and receptive. Numbness is a very like, keep things even keeled and whatnot. And, fear can sometimes make someone feel smaller than the challenge ahead, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can think things ahead of time, plan for things. So you have a lot of sense of control, right? If you lean into that
Okay.
emotion.
Sure.
But
Sure.
but anger is very visceral. It is very much felt in our physical bodies. It is very much outwardly expressed. So even when we see someone, with the um, crinkled eyebrows, right, we can automatically have an immediate reaction just seeing the visual externalized cues of anger.
Yes.
Whereas, if we see signs of sadness in someone or someone with more like flat affect,
Yep.
it doesn't sound the same kind of alarms as much. So out of the
Sure.
five, anger is probably the most scary or dangerous emotion, as a lot of highly sensitive persons and empaths would consider it. Not, and so because it's so intense, that tends to be the number one feeling that gets locked up,
Sure. And
right?
I just want to highlight, like, it sounds to me like when you first started talking about it being visceral and stuff, like I was thinking about it in terms of inside my own body, which is
Yeah,
true, but also it sounds like it probably starts with as we're wee little ones and people around us expressing anger, that's where it
yeah.
gets scary first, right? Before it becomes scary
It's
inside, or
maybe
both.
maybe both. I mean, I could even think about like a baby who is startled by these intense experiences because, you know, by the time we're born, that part of our brain is fully developed. Like babies don't have any problem getting towards like jumping from joy to sadness to rage
Sure.
and but the physiological experiences can feel very startling that itself might be upsetting,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And on top of just the body sensations, if we overlay the social context of what different
Totally.
emotions mean about someone, and then you can add in like gender constructs and whatever, it's kind of for survival, which often is in the context of relationships, for our own well-being, how do I best navigate this unexpected or unpredictable situation when things are moving so quickly and I don't even have time to think through decisions because it's happening all, they're spinning out of control,
Yeah.
right? And then if people associate, okay, anger, because I've seen expressions of anger be lead to lots of like bad consequences,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Broken
Yeah.
relationships, objects thrown, or people quit like a team because they can't take it anymore, right? We don't hear a lot of, uh, we don't think about a lot of experiences of positive outcomes with anger,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
if anger is associated with being destructive, being mean or cruel, HSPs also have a sensitivity around power dynamics. And
Oh,
when that
yes.
power is wielded poorly, like other people are taken advantage of, other people are hurt. Like what do highly sensitive people tend to do? They think about things in an empathetic lens. Like I want to be a
Yes.
nurturer, I want to be an encourager, supporter, a helper, all that kind of stuff. So the common go-to outcomes of anger expressions tend to be antithetical to the core values that HSPs tend to hold, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Because we don't see positive instances of anger actually being used well. And
Yeah.
those
Right.
come take in the form of finding out what's right or wrong, identifying ways by which our own rightful space or our boundaries have been breached, how we're mistreated or how others are mistreated. So it might be easier for sensitive folks to go mama bear mode when they see someone else being taken advantage
Totally.
of, right? Because it feels
Yes.
safer for us
Yes.
to feel anger on behalf of someone else, but it's terrifying for us to summon that same anger on behalf of ourselves, right? So, you
Yeah, that
know,
is so interesting. Like, yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, keep going.
all the ways that we associate anger with negative things makes it so that, naturally people would have more placating, people-pleasing type of relationships, right? We don't often even know that our own values have been breached because we're thinking like, oh my gosh, like, yes, I feel hurt, but they probably didn't mean to hurt me, or they were just having a hard day. And, if only they just had some more rest, or maybe I should like, take it easy on them. And there's like all these ways where we
Yeah,
underly do anger. And if we get
totally.
frustrated, we judge ourselves, right? So when we
Yeah.
feel anger that actually might be really righteous and useful, we judge ourselves. So we end up switching towards shame. So shame is like one of the go-to feelings that we get stuck in,
Yeah.
not knowing
Yeah.
that at a certain point, our feelings of shame itself might be a defense mechanism. In other words,
Okay.
feeling
Yeah, say more.
shame might feel safer than accessing and sticking with anger.
Right. Oh my gosh. Right. So, wow, I feel like there's a lot I want to say about that because the um thinking about anger in terms of our values and our value
Hmm.
system, and that whole mama bear thing. Like I know that's true in my own system. Like I'm more likely to take a stand if it's on
Hmm.
behalf of someone else for
Yeah.
sure. And it feels like because that's in line with my values. But when it comes to anger, um, I feel like there's a perception that anger, like you said, it can so easily lead to disconnect in a
Hmm.
relationship.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I would associate if somebody is like really angry at me, that feels like love has dropped away.
Hmm.
Um and so the value that I hold is maintaining the connection. So I'll definitely like you said, kind of bypass my own anger.
Right.
But I never thought of shame as feeling more safe than anger. Like that's a huge like, whoa, what?
Yeah. Well,
So
shame
yeah,
because it's a very internal experience for one. We can do our own shame feeling like by ourselves on our own time. No one else has to know.
Totally. That's
Right?
exactly it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in our shame, we can kind of recycle the same stories we've been telling ourselves. There's a lot more dimensions to this that kind of reinforce each other. Earlier, I mentioned about like power being wielded
Yes.
poorly, right? Uh, Power itself, which is actually a neutral thing, right? Like money is a neutral thing,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
power is also coded as a negative thing for highly sensitive people because it's too intense. It's more than we feel like we can handle. It feels unpredictable and it requires for people to respond to things more quickly in real time. All of that, I mean, I think Dr. Lane Aaron talks about the two different classes of people, right? The highly sensitive persons are like the scholarly priests who are kind of in their ivory towers and reading through all these books and analyzing things or reflecting on history or projecting ahead and
Totally.
things like that. But who's out there in the world? The warrior kings, right?
Mm.
And usually they are the ones who are associated with power. So when sensitive folks come in contact with power, it's like the only instance where I see power showing up is when warrior kings misuse it. I don't want to be like them, so I don't want to have anything to do with power
Yeah.
unless someone else is being taken advantage of by another party. And then I might step in. But that's probably the extent of it. But what
Yeah.
happens with HSPs in, let's say, professional arenas? We're usually the ones who are not applying for that promotion. We're
Yeah.
not advocating for us to get credit. We don't speak up for ourselves when, too much is put onto our plates. The professional realm is one main example of where power is absolutely essential for us to get in touch with, but we put in all the hard work behind the scenes without complaining, and then some asshole over there swoops in and takes the credit. And then
Totally.
we're sitting over here kind
Yeah.
of like grumbling to ourselves, but no one really ever knows that that was bothersome to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, I'm I'm I can see that it's like that we're making a connection kind of between being able to be okay with anger kind of
Hmm.
equates to being able to be okay with power.
Hmm.
And the shame is us kind of giving our power away. Is
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
kind
and
like yeah.
anger, power, intensity. That will be the other. Like
Ah,
these three things are so associated with each other, and
okay.
because things feel like they're too much, those who are highly sensitive tend to pull away from it when actually when we lean into intensity and find some other coping ways for us to decompress more readily, right? Like do the hard thing anyway, and afterwards give yourself like a 2 hour decompression break rather than not
Oh,
doing the thing at all and
yeah.
still stewing on
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So,
Okay.
for warrior kings, it's like they don't even bother to aim. They fire and then they just let other people deal with the consequences, usually, right? Whereas highly sensitive folks are like ready, aim, aim, aim. They never get to fire, right?
Gosh, yeah.
So
Totally.
finding out that both classes have their respective biases, and we need to find a way to move towards the middle so that, we have diversified skill sets and we're not just
Mhm. Mhm.
pigeonholed into either of our stances. So those who are in the warrior class as non-HSPs need to learn how to make more room for sensitivity and nuance and reflecting ahead of time and, decompressing afterwards, whatever, right? But those who are highly sensitive need to recognize that us overly leaning into our inclinations actually makes hard things harder,
Yeah,
and that we're just recycling our same perceptions over and over again, like power equals dangerous.
right.
And that's not necessarily true. So we might need to think about or rethink the way that we categorize anger, because an anger expression can sound as neutral as, hey, can you give me back my stapler? It doesn't have to escalate. It's more of like, hey, like I need
Yeah.
that thing back. Can I get it back by this time?
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm just like, yeah, totally. It is. It's like when you talk about the aim, like we're pre-rehearsing how it's going to go and assume that it's going to escalate. And that's enough to scare us from not even saying the thing that, like you said, easy
Yeah,
breezy, neutral.
yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
Okay, so
So,
I'm trying to be mindful of time.
mhm.
So talking about the how to make those conversations neutral, like is that a way to feed into, can you talk to us about your free gift, the Big Feelings First Aid Kit? Like do those,
Yeah,
does that
yeah,
conversation kind of merge
yeah,
together?
yeah, yeah. So it's okay for us to not know what to do in each moment.
Mm,
Sometimes we just need to buy ourselves time.
okay.
As long as we're not putting things that are on the back burner, like forever on the back burner. As long as we make room to come back to those things and actually work through it so that we can do important work like taking back our power, right?
Yeah.
Setting those boundaries, being more assertive, and recognizing that being an empowered person is not a bad thing. It's a great thing, right? And there's a time for sensitivity, there's a time to lean ahead, there's a time to rest, there's a time to take action, but that might be too big of a jump right now. So
Sure.
in between, when we tend to backpedal and have these big feelings that come out of nowhere, we need to buy ourselves some more time. So I do have a free guide that's called the Big Feelings First Aid Kit. And it's kind of a couple of steps that help people know what to do when feelings seem to show up at the wrong place, wrong time, and in the wrong ways. So, you know, in the middle of a job interview is not the time for you to process where your feelings came from and what to do
Yeah.
about them.
Yeah.
You can do that afterwards. But in the moment, you might need to have some ready go-to skills, some
Mhm.
speed dial options. Um, this is a first aid kit. It's not meant to fully resolve everything. And so there's some other stuff that comes down the line as well. But first things first, we treat things more neutrally. It's like, oh, there's a feeling. I don't need to unpack that right now, but I know that there's a feeling. And right now in this moment, I need to do X, Y, Z. What are the next steps? You know, I need to stay present. I need to stay focused on this interview conversation, or I need to do this task before the deadline hits.
Mm,
Right? But keeping it more neutral instead of enhancing our shame message. Like, see, I knew I couldn't do it.
right.
Right?
Oh, wow.
So there's a
Mm,
lot more to it. And I said before, like the big five feelings, it's useful to understand each emotion in relation to the others, meaning we can't just focus on one. We need to see them in a bigger context, right?
yeah.
Otherwise, we end up having very intense, distorted messages about different emotions, and then we end up playing favorites, like
Right.
preferring fear or preferring shame or preferring numbness. So
Right.
sometimes, people might hear this like, I don't prefer shame. What are you talking about? You don't like shame, but if we think about what you tend to do, that tells us the inclination towards certain emotions, like
Totally.
favoritism towards it. So it's important to know our own emotional habits. If we, treat some of these, give more room to some of these more than others, we're going to find ourselves backpedaling in reactive decisions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because really it's about becoming fluent in all of the feelings, right? Because we're having all of them. Let's just be
Yeah,
fluent in all of them instead of, like you said, no one wants to think of it as your favorite. But yeah, if that's your default where you're going all the time and you're kind of stewing in it,
yeah,
um, that says a lot. Like it's just, yeah, it's just information, right?
yeah. Traffic lights have red, yellow, and green. You can't pick and choose which color you like better in that moment because all three of
Right.
them mean something in relation to the other.
Yeah.
In order for us to
Yeah.
know what to do next in, seeing traffic lights, we need to make room for all three options. In the
Right.
same way, in order for us to actually be resilient and, skillfully navigate through the different situations in life, we need to have the full range of emotions. That I came across this term called emo diversity,
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
meaning the more familiarity you have with the full range, like the full breadth and depth of emotions,
Yeah.
the greater one's level of personal well-being. There are
Oh,
like actual research studies that show that people who are more flexible with their emotions tend to do better in life. Doesn't mean that they don't suffer, but when suffering happens, and it will happen to all of us, we're able to be resilient and navigate through those situations. So that's my main job as a feelings
yeah.
translator, to help people find out, okay, what are the biases we have towards our feelings and maybe also towards other people's feelings? And how can we expand our range so that we don't end up overdoing certain emotions and underdoing others?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And because they're all like, so we talked about anger
Hmm.
and your personal power being connected, and
Yeah,
I can only imagine that there's other connections to other expressions of
there's
your
so much.
self,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so much. Like this is
Yeah.
just the beginning of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, what you shared is very powerful. I think it's very important work,
Hmm.
especially for those of us who do feel our feelings really big. Like that's yeah, it is how we kind of walk in the world, right? It's just we're just big old feelings walking around. And if we're only like allowing one to really show up, we're missing out
Yeah.
on so much and so much of ourselves, not just so much of life experience.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, beautiful. Okay, so any final words or like a lasting message or the first like other than going to get your big feelings first aid kit, like the first step towards like how can yeah, what would you suggest for our audience?
There's no being behind.
Mm,
Starting where we are now is more than enough. And the only thing I ask of people is to take a beat and to be open and curious to things that are outside our current perception. We don't know, it's like the Truman Show, like, you might hit a wall that's painted into the sky. We don't know what's on the other side, but we know that this is um, a, a counterfeit version of life that we're living, because we only know what we know and we don't know what we don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
right? And if we only rely on what we know because it's familiar, it feels safe, and all of that, we end up creating struggles for ourselves. So a lot of this work is about being open and courageous to try something different. Be
Mhm.
curious. And as for like, what you do like 10 steps from now, that's not relevant. It's not relevant until we've done the previous 9 steps. So
Yeah, yeah.
focus
There's
on the
only
one
this
thing.
one. Yeah,
Just
yeah.
the one thing. Just start with the first aid kit,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
in the same way you would be gentle towards other people who have, a long trip ahead of them, like treat yourself the same way. Don't make yourself the exception to the rule.
yeah. Yes, because and that's kind of how people pleasers roll. That's kind of how we are in the world. Yeah,
Mhm.
totally. And I do want to backtrack because one of the things you said, because we have a tendency to put it on a shelf and not go
Mhm.
back to it, but you're like, make sure you go back to it.
I
That's
mean, if you
part of the
don't do
process.
it, your relationships or your physical body or your work, it's going to do it for you. So, in the spirit of increasing self-control, create some time for you to go back to the thing in smaller
Yeah,
doses and in ways or in timings where you actually have a say.
yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing I'm hearing is that you're saying to basically create a practice out of it. And
Yeah,
it's the importance of taking the time. And that is the one thing that we can control. And that's one thing that we need, like specifically as highly sensitives, is
yeah.
that
And
time.
it's totally accessible. We just start with
Yeah,
that one next thing.
yeah.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Wow. Love you. Love you. I love
I'll
you.
take it. Yeah.
And also, I
Yeah.
love this conversation.
Yeah.
It's a lovely conversation and it's an important conversation. And I feel that anyone that's here and listening, they do know that there's an opportunity for a different way to experience how they're walking through the world. So thank you for the work that you do in the world. I know everybody is going to be grabbing their first aid kit so they can learn more about this because there's a wealth of knowledge that you have, and I really hope they access it. Yeah, so thank you very much. And yeah, we'll chat soon.
All right.